For the test on knights, this is test number 4. The level estimated for this puzzle is 1600 to 1800, and it's white to move. You can pause it here if you want. Alright, this is from the game Girl v. Brain, Brooklyn ICC 2007. White wasn't sure what to do and accordingly played a move, bishop c3, ? That actually hindered her proper plan. The key here is to being aware of the holes on d4 and d5. Black needs to get a knight to d4 as quickly as possible, and white needs to get a knight to d5 at warp speed. So in this interface I can't use arrows and highlight squares, so you'll just have to follow my mouse to know what square I'm talking about. Once you realize where your pieces should go, it becomes easy to find the correct moves to make it happen. However, if you are just mindlessly calculating moves with no real plan in mind, then you'll usually play something that has little or nothing to do with the needs of the position. In the diagram, white would love to play knight d2 to b1 to c3 to d5. However, moving the d2 knight would result in the loss of the e4 pawn. Thus, defend the pawn. Explaining the rating spread. I would hope that players in the 1400 to 1800 range would recognize a huge hole and try to get their knight to it. However, in this case e4 is weak, so this process calls for some patience. As a result, I upped the difficulty level to 1600. Rook f to e1. ! Defending e4 and thus freeing the d2 knight of guard duty. As mentioned earlier in the game, white played the nonsensical bishop c3. Taking the c3 square away from the knight. The continuation, which doesn't boast ideal play for either side, was rook f d8, finally noticing that d5 would make a nice home for her knight. Fortunately, in this case, all roads lead to Rome. White's doing well. Bishop h3 was very strong. So this move would take advantage of the fact that this bishop is on a different diagonal, and we can see the f5, e6, and f7 squares are producing a bit of a weakness on the light squares, so this bishop is very strong here, whereas in this diagonal it doesn't have much to do. And it's also pinning the knight here. But white plays rook d2 in the game. Knight to c7. So the point of this move is to go to e6 and then d4. Rook a to d1, ? Literally ignoring black's idea. If you refuse to take your opponent's plans into consideration, you are dooming yourself to a lot of pain. Instead of 7 rook a to d1, simply bishop h3, stopping knight e6 in its tracks, would have given white a very large advantage. Knight e6. g4, knight to d4. And though white still has a huge plus, black's chances have significantly improved. And note how useless white's idea of doubling on the d-file has turned out to be. So here it doesn't look like white has much of an advantage anymore, and both sides have strongly placed knights in the center that will likely be traded. I think the bishop will probably take here, and if that happens, then black is doing perfectly fine with open file, outpost on c5. This pawn's hit now, so I don't think there's much to learn from this position, but we can go back and go through some better moves. Okay, so rook e1, a6, a4, takes, rook a8, rook takes a8, rook takes a8, knight to b1, followed by knight c3 to d5 with the solid plus. Okay, so I think that this position It's clear that white has more counterplay than black, but it's not so clear that white has a winning position. I like the pawn on b5 here. That gives a lot of space. And the knight coming to d5 is going to be a big problem for black. But let's try to play a few more moves. And so knight f8 isn't playable because the pawn on e5 drops. But let's try to play a few more moves and see how the game goes. So bishop to d6, over defending the pawn on e5. And now we could try knight to f8, trying to get to e6 in time. And now knight to d5. So I think knight taking would probably be better for black because bishop takes would forfeit the two bishops, and I don't think that the knights are going to be very good in this position. So knight takes, now pawn takes, hitting this pawn, so f6. And I think there's a ton more to be looked at here. But one possible plan would be to bring the knight to h4 and try to come to f5 and maybe even capture the bishop. So this just doesn't, it does look like a passive position for black. I think if rook a2, the queen can kick the rook out, so it's a waste of time. Actually, b1 would be even better. So possibly bishop c8. And I think, well, I wouldn't play knight f5 right away, because then maybe rook a2 might create some problems after something like this. But I think white has all the time here. Black does not have much to do, and white will definitely be able to carry this advantage into endgame. So maybe this would be more of a section that we could look at in the when we're analyzing past pawns and things like that. So Silman ends the analysis in this position right here.